Back to the war with Iran, where Iran and the United States seem to be in an impasse. President Trump has rejected Iran's proposed peace plan after days of attacks. For more on this, I want to bring in CBS News contributor Niall Ferguson. He's a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution and a columnist for the Free Press. Good to see you. So do we have your audio there now?
You should be able to hear me.
There you go. So let me ask you about your recent Free Press article. You liken this war with Iran to World War I. President Woodrow Wilson, of course, had a 14-point peace plan, but that war lasted another 10 months. Are you suggesting that that could happen in this particular scenario?
Well, everybody thought this would be a short war, including me, but it is worth remembering that everybody thought World War I would be a short war in 1914, and it was anything but. Woodrow Wilson had 14 points. January 1918 took another 10 months for that war to end. And I think the general lesson is that wars can start quickly, but they take a long time to end. We're now into 10 weeks of this war. There's a ceasefire, but that's not the end of the war. And indeed, President Trump's recent Truth Social suggests that he's not at all satisfied with the Iranian response to the 14 points. So one can't rule out a resumption of hostilities at some point. And that, I think, is the president's problem. The timeline is just getting extended. And as it gets extended, the economic pain inflicted by the Strait of Hormuz on the world economy gets closer and closer to the U.S. economy.
And you talked about pain there. You write, Niall, that Iran's economy has, quote, at least 4 pressure valves that could postpone collapse for months. So I just wonder, how much could the American public's disapproval of the president and this war impact how long the war actually lasts?
Well, this is about timelines and it's about pain thresholds. And I think it's fairly clear that the pain threshold for the United States is quite a bit lower than it is for Iran, which is long run an economy under sanctions. American voters are already mad about affordability. And really, they haven't felt anything like the full pain that is coming because they've only really seen the impact of the war on the price of gasoline. They haven't seen the impact of the war on the prices of all the other things that are affected by the closure of the strait, like just about anything made of plastic, the impact on food because fertilizer supplies are being disrupted and the price of fertilizer is way higher for U.S. farmers. So I think with every passing week, the U.S. economy is getting a little closer to feeling the pain. If this Strait of Hormuz is still closed on July 4th, then inflation is likely going to be closer to 4%, and we're going to see lower growth this year by maybe a percentage point. So that's point one. Point two is that the blockade that the U.S. has imposed on Iran to try and stop it getting its oil out is part of Operation Economic Fury that's designed to collapse the Iranian economy into hyperinflation, food shortages, and perhaps regime change. And I think the problem is that Iran does have various safety valves. There are ways that it can store its oil even if it can't export it, for example, in empty tankers. There are things that it can do to get the oil across land. It's engaged in all kinds of barter transactions across its very long land border. And it can count on significant assistance from China, not only in terms of military support, which China has given Iran, but also in terms of economic support, because China is a significant trade partner. So I think the idea that the Iranian economy would obligingly collapse very quickly once the U.S. blockaded Iran was over-optimistic. And my sense is that given the reserves that Iran has and the ways in which it can continue to keep its economy just about functioning, the timeline is just longer than I think President Trump and his advisors can possibly be comfortable with.
So now it's a fascinating analysis, and I encourage everybody to check out your article in the Free Press. But it also sounds like what you're saying, or maybe in my mind, our position, the United States position in the world will be greatly diminished no matter what the outcome is here. And here's why I think you and others are right about what you're saying, which is that Iran seems, we went from the president of the United States saying only total and unconditional surrender was the option on the table to now they want to negotiate. We want to negotiate with them. It strikes me that Iran being in total control of the Strait of Hormuz, whatever the outcome is ultimately, is that they will still be in control of that strait. They've proven that they can be. So they've almost, in a way, even though they've had the bombing campaign has devastated the country, there's no doubt that Americans' prowess with the military is, no one can compete with us on that level. But it strikes me that Iran is sort of like now positioning themselves as a major power in that region, in that they can close or open that strait willy-nilly, despite repeated bombings from the United States, and that India, China's roles are also greatly strengthened. Russia's role is greatly strengthened as a cause of this conflict. In other words, do you think that the United States and how we're perceived in the world will be diminished no matter what the outcome of this conflict is?
If things stay as they are through this month and next month, then I think that's highly likely. Therefore, it's very urgent that the United States break out of this stalemate. Iran's neighbors are clearly very worried that Iran has a new power, despite all the military damage and the economic damage it's suffered, and that power is to threaten shipping in the strait and therefore to close it. If you ask the Emiratis, they're desperate for the United States not to let this stand. Another way of looking at it is you're a superpower, but your navy can't contend with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, even though you inflicted massive damage on them. Is that really the naval power of a superpower? President Trump had the option to use military force, that would have been naval and special operations, to take control of the strait. And 4 or 5 weeks ago, I believe he was given that option and turned it down because he felt that the casualties would be too high. I think this was a mistake, and it's created a reliance on economic warfare, on reliance on the blockade, which I think is something of an old American habit. Rather than risk the lives of service personnel, let's just rely on economic pressure. But economic sanctions are just not sufficient in themselves, I think, to bring about the strategic outcome the U.S. needs. And that's why we've ended up in the stalemate you described. If things stay like this, or if we end up with a compromise that leaves Iran with this option in future, then I'm afraid you're right, Vlad. I think the net result will be negative for the United States, and that's why the president can't leave this stalemate for much longer.
I know we got to run now, but it's just such a fascinating discussion. I mean, at the end of the day, if a president is not prepared to do the ultimate, you talked about World War I. We saw how horrific that Great War, it was called the Great War, as everybody knows, before World War II, how horrific that war was, is because all the leaders who were involved in that war were willing to commit to the ultimate sacrifice, which was the ultimate decimation of young men for many, many years. But it doesn't strike me that this president is ready to do that. He's not willing. He was not willing. He thought this was going to be something like Venezuela. He was not willing to put boots on the ground. And my guess is, according to your sources, do you think he is at this point?
Well, I don't think we should draw analogies with the massive conflicts of the 20th century, because the kind of options the president had before him, I think, involved special forces being deployed, not a vast number of people, to try to ensure that the Strait of Hormuz was no longer under Iranian control. And I think the decision not to do that was a questionable one. I'm pretty sure the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Dan Kane, will have explained to the president that after the airstrikes against Iran, you had to be ready for this eventuality of a threat to the strait, and you had to therefore be ready to deploy special forces onto the ground. I think that's the key here. It's not like the United States has to fight World War III. Iran is not a superpower. Much of its military capabilities have been degraded in the first phase of the war, Operation Economic Fury. But if you leave Iran, despite all the damage you've inflicted, with control of the Strait of Hormuz and the ability to reestablish that control in future, then strategically you've screwed up. And so I think there's a need to reassess the options, and President Trump has to accept that there may need to be further military measures if he's to achieve success here. Economic pressure alone, I don't think, will be enough.
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent point, although all the reports out there suggest that he is, like all of us who were around during the 1980 operation to try and rescue those 52 American hostages in Tehran, Operation Eagle Claw, where 8 service members died. The president thinks about that a lot, and even a small contingent of special forces, Niall, is what I'm saying, is if there were losses, that would play very much into his psyche about. We can talk about this for an hour. You should come on. We should do a podcast and talk about this.
That would be my pleasure. The right
I would love to
analogy,
do
think
that.
of Desert Storm. Think of Desert Storm. Don't worry about being Jimmy Carter. Be President George H.W. Bush. That's my message.
I love it. Niall, thank you very much for your
Thank
insight,
you.
my friend. Appreciate it. Really great.
My pleasure.